And while I get the computer on and the next presenter comes up, there's just a couple of things I wanted to notice. I mentioned my blissfully ignorant hat yesterday. I found it and I've got it here, and we want to remain blissfully ignorant about things like global energy policy and stuff, and focus on pipelines today, so I'm going to leave it here as a reminder. I also wanted to point out, because I forgot to earlier, that people that were at the reception last night and heard Bruce's speech about the value of the trust and the need for donations and stuff, there's a table back there. Glenn, give us a wave so people know where the table's at, if people are so inclined. We're going to move on, and as anybody that has put on a conference, there's moments of panic. You're standing up here and all of a sudden it dawns on you that, oh boy, I screwed up this time. And I'm having one of those now because I forgot to ask how to pronounce the next presenter's name, and it's something other than Tom Smith. So but first I'm going to find it. She's happy to introduce herself, but, rather than have me butcher her name. This is an interesting thing, and I started talking with the Chemical Safety Board, 9 months ago, I guess, about ways that maybe we could collaborate. And the Chemical Safety Board is kind of a sister organization to the NTSB and does investigations of more stationary facilities. And being involved with public awareness programs with the pipelines, we had run into this video in this effort that the Chemical Safety Board had put out about some oil and gas facilities. And so it isn't specific to pipelines, but it's specific to things that a lot of pipelines are attached to. And it's a great, I think, example of some public awareness. So I'd like to introduce Vidisha Parasram. Close enough.
Parasram.
And she's going to tell us a little bit about the Chemical Safety Board, and then we're going to show you this short public awareness video that they produced about some oil and gas facilities. Let's see if I can get this microphone put back in. And if we can get the slides switched, we should be all set. There we go. It's just the up and down buttons.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Carl. You did a good job pronouncing my name. Believe it or not, lots of people have problems pronouncing my name. So the Chemical Safety Board, we're a federal agency. It's a small agency, so lots of us wear a lot of different hats. I'm currently the director of our data gathering, our incident screening program, which is brand new, but I was an investigator, and the investigations I'll be talking to you about today, actually, I led them, and it's an issue that we really resonated with us, and we spent a lot of years just watching, because we're usually in oil refineries and chemical plants and warehouses, and not necessarily at exploration and production tank battery sites, but we found ourselves there in the last 2 years. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming, and I'm really glad to be here and introduce the Chemical Safety Board to the Pipeline Safety Trust. Before I move on, though, I have to say that this is not the board's opinion. These are my opinions. And even though I'm providing you with information from a board report, what I say is definitely my opinion. And just our agenda. So I don't know if, I think most of you have heard of the Chemical Safety Board, but for those of you who haven't, we're an independent federal agency. We were founded under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. Essentially, right after a number of major catastrophic chemical accidents in the 80s, namely Seveso, Italy, with the dioxin release, and then Bhopal, India in 1984, with the methyl isocyanate release into the community. Congress created the Chemical Safety Board essentially as a cousin to the National Transportation Safety Board to look at safety gaps and prevent accidents like those from happening in America, and also the Phillips refinery accident in Texas City. We take our independence very, very, very seriously. Sorry, I'm very short. also. We go out and we're charged with doing these very independent investigations, and because we're not under DOL or the EPA, we report directly to Congress. We're able to look at the safety gaps in the whole system, including the regulator and the safety culture within a company. And essentially, we like to say holistically at society's safety culture. So like Carl said, we are mainly regulated to look at fixed facilities. We do root cause investigations, and we can't issue citations or fines, but we can publicize our findings, which are embarrassing, and advocate for change. And we offer recommendations to prevent these accidents from happening again. And typically we'll make our recommendations to industry groups and regulators, and we're starting to move away from company-specific regulations, but we also make them to the companies. So this accident, the accidents I'll be talking to you about today, there are three major ones that we actually investigated, but we've been watching it since since 2003, and our agency was founded in 1990, but we were funded in 1998. So we started seeing explosions at oil and gas storage sites in 2000, and when you see an accident that comes across with 4 fatalities of teenagers and 1 injured, and a number of them, it piqued our interest because we were curious as to what was going on, but it wasn't a refinery and we're a new agency, so our leadership essentially watched these accidents happen for a number of years. And what we collected information on them. And what we found was that here teenagers or young people were going to these oil and gas storage sites, and they're usually isolated, and they're hanging out, and hanging out included either smoking around the tanks or something, and an explosion ensued. And when we talked to the local responders, they would often tell us the same story, that there weren't marked tanks, even though they should have been marked. They're not necessarily secured, and these places are ubiquitous in rural America, or in oil states and gas states. And this is just a typical, this isn't an exact schematic of what an oil and gas tank storage site looks like, but the oil essentially gets pulled out of the wellbore. It goes to an oil and gas separator right here, and then it goes through a series of pipes to the storage tanks. Now, what we found in a lot in our analysis is that these tanks, they typically fill up over a course of a month. They have a well tender that goes to the site to check the levels of the oil, and they have to go and check the tank hatch. So they need a catwalk here to access the tank hatch. And these tanks, unless you're in California, which is really the only state that requires something called a vapor recovery system, which completely seals off the whole process and doesn't release emissions into the air. Most of these tanks in rural America have atmospheric vents. So you have oxygen from the outside mixing in with the flammable off-gassing of oil or condensate inside of the tank. And so we found that, we say it's a Swiss cheese model, but all the holes line up. It's a really precarious situation, but when the tanks are emptied and they're just starting to fill up, and there's just enough oil left or gas or condensate, and this huge vapor space develops, and at this constant mixing with the oxygen in the air, you have a lower explosive limit. And so any kind of off-gassing near, or any ignition source near the tank or close to the hatch can cause a really catastrophic condition. And what responders told us was that these tanks were also exploding because of lightning strikes. So this is what the tanks look like. And as we started to investigate this issue more, we found that it got really more complex because we were getting into this hodgepodge of mineral rights versus surface rights, and we found that mineral estate rights where these operators were leasing were often, they can essentially put a tank battery site 150 to about 300 feet from an existing structure, a school, house of residence. But then, so that's a mineral owner right. who owns the mineral rights, but the surface owner who owns the house can lease that land to a hunter, or a hunting lease. So people can walk around and hunt on the surface near the tanks, and they can drill and store flammable substances, which are typically unmarked. And so this was a perfect sort of storm brewing. So our investigation, it was actually in 2009, on Halloween of 2009, where we were called late at night and started following up on this accident. 2 teenagers came home from a football party and decided to hang out, and this accident site was about 150 yards from one of the boys' houses, and they just went down to sit on the catwalk and talk. And so there was an explosion around 4 in the morning, and they both lost their lives. And we deployed to this accident, and we found that even though it's about 150 feet from one of the young man's houses, and he was 18, the site was essentially really isolated. It was a wooded clearing, so it was very attractive to just go and hang out. And apparently there are a lot of high school kids that go and just hang out at these sites. So we went and deployed and collected evidence and talked to the community members. And then we recognized that the community didn't view these sites as dangerous. They really, they rode their 4-wheelers here. They told us they hunted on these sites. They used the catwalk as a looking out point. And so we recognized that this issue was happening to kids under 25. So we wanted to address it directly, because the Chemical Safety Board, we usually make videos addressing issues for the workers' population. This was our first foray into, a public awareness video. So we set up a Facebook page, like everyone does now, and we started to coordinate with the community, and we went down and we made this video. It's about 11 minutes, and it's a little long, just to address the issue. And we developed a lesson plan, and we worked with teachers, and we were really trying to just get the message out. And we actually partnered a little with the Smalley Foundation in our latter part of our outreach, just to get the message to these communities. So we're going to try and show you the video now.
My name is Sean Ashley Davis. I'm a senior at Forest County Agricultural High School in Mississippi. And on October 31st, 2009, 2 people who were very close to me and the ones I loved died in an instant. Was it a car crash? No. It was an oil tank explosion. Why? How? We wanted answers, we wanted the truth, and now we want to make a difference.
About life a lot.
Played football a bit.
Wade and I hung out every day.
The oil site, nobody even thought that would actually happen.
It hit our school pretty hard because we all knew one or both of
I didn't
them.
really want to believe it. I was too
It's
shocked.
still kind of hard, and you don't understand why it happened.
At the oil sites, we just sometimes build a fire, just hang
Even
out.
my dad told me we didn't know they could blow up.
I would have known. I definitely wouldn't be hanging around them.
I can't believe he's gone. It's like, I don't even think it's hit me full front yet. It just doesn't feel right without him here. We just lost 2 very good friends. And none of us knew the dangers of the oil sites until that happened.
Wade was my boyfriend ever since my freshman year 2 years ago. We had started talking, and we've been dating on and off since then. I did not know tank sites were dangerous before this accident. We used to hang out there all the time and go do whatever down there.
When we go hang out at an oil site, a bunch of friends and I, we just usually, go get a pack of cigarettes or something and talk about what has been going on through the week. It's like our own little sanctuary where we can just be away from everybody. I do love you.
I love you too.
You too, Jerry.
I'm Philip White. I'm the father of Wade White, who was tragically killed October the 31st in a tank explosion right here just outside my yard in South Forest County. Wade was just a wonderful child. I mean, who would have thought 18 years ago when he was just a little baby that 18 years later that we'd be going to his funeral. He struggled in school academically, but I mean, he toughed it out and actually graduated. He always told me, Daddy, don't worry, I'm gonna amount to something. And, you know, but obviously this cut that short, you know. But just such a wonderful, two wonderful children just gone instantly.
This picture was taken in August or September before Devin died. We were down at the lake one afternoon looking at the geese. I had my camera out. He looked over at me and didn't really want his picture taken, but that little smile that's on his face was so typical of him. Football was really important to Devin. He enjoyed being on the team. Devin was buried in his jersey, and the entire football team served as honorary pallbearers.
I can't wait till after school. I'm really looking forward to go talking to the sheriff, getting some questions answered. Got a lot on my mind.
I don't think these are bad kids, and I don't think these are stupid kids. I think this was an accident. Except for the grace of God, my son could have been there. And my son, I can tell you, as well as I know my son, would have not balked at a moment about going down there. So it caused me to go home and hug my child and talk to him about these sites down in the south end of the county.
Why do you think people don't understand the dangers of these sites?
Probably they're not educated to the fact that they can be dangerous. I think most of the time that kids hang out at those places is usually located in close proximity to where they live. It's just a common gathering place. I mean, what stops you from it? If you haven't ever been told that you shouldn't or that it's dangerous.
What kind of laws would you like to see passed to regulate the oil well sites?
You should have some kind of barrier and some kind of signage that indicates that this is a dangerous place to be. Not having any barrier at all, to me, just invites an accident.
If these accidents have occurred in the past, why hasn't anything been done to prevent them?
I think that's a great question. I'd like somebody to answer that question for me.
Today we're going to talk to David White, and we would like to find out the science behind this hazard from him, if he can tell us.
We make a list in our magazine of major incidents that occur in fires and explosions. And my editor came to me one day and he said, do you know how many kids have gotten killed around these old oil well sites? And I was amazed. It was like 30 or 40 just on one list, which is a lot.
Can you explain the science behind this hazard?
Okay, I think I can better illustrate this by drawing you a picture. Now, we've got a tank out here that looks something like this. And what you have here is you have crude oil. Now, that could be 6 inches. It could be completely full to the top. Now, above the crude oil, which is liquid, you have vapors. Now, if the vapors are mixed with air correctly, you have what we call a combustible or a flammable vapor space in that tank. You've got a hole in the top of the tank called a hatch, and that opening is where the vapors come out. The vapors, again, don't burn because you have to have fuel, which we have. You have to have air, which you have. Now, what's missing is a spark. That spark can come from somebody with a big lighter. They can have a match. There's some other ways they make sparks. And when that happens, you get an explosion inside this tank. And just remember, guys, tanks like this with crude oil will burn, they will explode, and they can kill you. And I don't want to see some young man or young lady get killed or burned horribly. And that's what we want to do, is prevent these things.
Now this is the site where the accident happened, and you see how easy it is to walk from my house to it, just virtually, like I say, 100 yards right here. You can see this is very unsecured. There's no gates, no fences, no signs. There's nothing to say there's danger here at this site. The tank was sitting right here beside this tank, and when the explosion happened, it blew that tank 60 yards out there. This is exactly where their bodies was laying. The little 16-year-old Devin was laying right here face down, and my son was laying right here face down. You know, this is the last place that my son actually took a breath of life. He was probably dead by the time he got here. It was blown 40 yards from there to here. And what a wonderful, wonderful son, what a wonderful life, just wasted and gone. You know, so tragic. And it's so preventable. It's such a simple little thing, such as fences, gates, and signs, could certainly prevented this accident.
After this incident occurred, the next day I started looking into, who actually regulates this industry, and a lot of this is kind of a gray area, so maybe that needs to be looked at further.
Do you think any laws will be passed to make them secure these sites?
I certainly hope so. That's a long process, and it's got to start somewhere, and the grassroots level is where it starts. So we have to keep that in front of the public. We have to make sure that you people, the people who live around there, are aware of the danger. It's unfortunate these two young people lost their lives. Their whole life was ahead of them, and now they're not with us. But, if their lives could at least bring better awareness to the young people, they're the ones that really need to know that this is not a place you just go to hang out. So if that could be brought to the attention, then all this would certainly be worthwhile.
Even though that there aren't signs and stuff, I hope that now people will realize that these are dangerous places.
These tanks are dangerous and they can hurt you. And they're not just a cool place to hang around. They're not fun. They can kill you.
It's a secluded place. It's isolated off from everybody else. You can go out there and you can do things that you shouldn't be doing, and I know that's what they're doing. But it's not worth it. It's not worth going out there and losing your life over it.
That video we've been actually we sent it to all of the high school, the various high schools in Mississippi, because this accident was in Mississippi, and remarkably we've gotten a lot of community support, and we've worked very well with the community. The parents were obviously aghast at what's happened, but they mobilized and they worked together with the county to pass the county ordinance, which what we found in our analysis was that there are actually no, in most rural communities, there aren't any county zoning ordinances to require any kind of fencing or signage in cities. They have zoning ordinances, and in most cities where there are tank battery sites, they require fencing and signage, and just for beautification, and the oil companies want to drill and store oil within the limits. So this community actually worked with to pass this local ordinance, and now they worked, and they actually campaigned the legislature and were able to work with the Oil and Gas Board, and the Oil and Gas Board of Mississippi implemented just the beginning of this year. They changed some of the safety requirements. So they've been doing a lot with the use of this video as a tool, and just essentially their passion for getting change done. So actually we released this video in April of last year, and like 2 days later, another accident happened in Willika, Oklahoma, and that claimed the life of one 21-year-old man and injured his friend. They were again going down to the northern Canadian River, and this is photos of the access point to the oil well site. The oil well site's about a mile away in from this dirt road, but this dirt road was also an access point to the northern Canadian River, and they were going to go fishing. And they just happened to stop at the oil site, and it was about 8 o'clock at night. It was dark, and they climbed up on the catwalk, and one friend the survivor testified that it was really dark and he wanted to see, and as he took out his lighter and lit it, the explosion happened. And the gentleman who passed away, the 21-year-old, actually told first responders what happened before he died. But there weren't really any signs here. We found one sign identifying the gas line, and where these facilities exist, we find that there are actually all these issues with gathering lines also. So people in the communities were actually telling us that these tanks are an issue, but also the gathering lines are a bigger issue because they keep nicking them with their whenever they mow their lawns and things like that. And so this is a Willika accident, and I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to go through it. And then about a week later, another accident happened in New London, Texas. And a 24-year-old woman was fatally injured in this accident. Again, the site was located in the middle, in the community, but off a dirt road. And again, it had no access. Well, they did have signs at this facility, but there was no gate to restrict access or anything along those lines. At the accident site, there was clearly other community members have used these sites or access these sites. We found a child's bike at the site. And then the warning sign, which had no smoking or matches or open lighters, had tags, graffiti tags on it from the local gang. So people were accessing these facilities. So we essentially did some research after the other two accidents in last year. We found 26 accidents through media searches throughout the country, or in oil states in the country. And they resulted in about 44 fatalities totally. But these are media searches. We had a really hard time finding adequate data. Unless it's labeled in essentially a death record that this is an oil tank explosion, and we went to every public health facility and accessed those death records. That's pretty much the only way that you can ascertain the prevalence of these accidents. So from the incidents, we did find 26. Most of them are in Texas and Oklahoma, then Louisiana and Ohio. Ohio recognized that this is an issue in the early 2000s and actually made advances at passing rules to require flame arresters at tanks and signage and things like that, but only in urban areas. Rural areas are still relatively unprotected. And these accidents are mostly, 10 of the 26 were multi-fatality, multi-injury accidents. And there are about 800,000 oil and gas wells in this country, and they all have to store their commodity somewhere. So, and with the increase in the trend for increased drilling activity, and you all have talked about it here yesterday and today, these sites will only increase. And we wanted to document that the community really they didn't really view these as dangerous. And I mean, you can say this is some kind of normalization effect happening in the communities. They grow up by these sites. Most of the time in the 80s, and the community members told us in the 90s, they were not active. And then when energy prices started to increase in 2005, 2006, all of a sudden an inactive well was active, and it's a stripper well barely producing anything, but you have this hazard which wasn't necessarily hazardous in the past. So we went and we did a community survey with the help of community members in Kearns, and we got 190 response, and 11% of the responders said they did hang out at these sites. 14% said when they did do that, they hung out with friends. 19% said they rode four-wheelers around them. They fished or hunted, 11.5% said that. 7 actually were brave enough and said, and we didn't collect personal identification or anything like that, these were anonymous, but they walked on catwalks and smoked cigarettes. And 11 visited the site at least once a year, and 21 said they did so less than once a year, but they did. And so we did a regulatory analysis, and we found that locally, on the local level, the rules really, really vary. Often there are no local ordinances. At the state level, really a patchwork. Most states don't have security measures for oil and gas facilities. And we talked to the Department of Homeland Security, and they said, well, we don't really consider these a terrorism threat, so aren't responsible for requiring security measures at these facilities. So at the time of these accidents, Mississippi Oil and Gas Board had no security measures. Texas Railroad Commission, the regulator in Texas, didn't have any security measures, and Oklahoma Corporation Commission didn't also. But they all had more strict regulations or security regulations for when hydrogen sulfide is present on the site. So only sites with hydrogen sulfide had like a toxic placard or something like that marked. And they all said that that's for occupational protections, not public. We also looked, so because Mississippi has been making all these advances with the push of the families, they've actually, I told you, changed their rules, and they have this catwalk gate on the catwalk now, and they have warning signs on the periphery of the site that they're requiring, but families are still pushing for fencing. And we found on the federal level that the E&P facilities, exploration and production facilities, are really exempt from a lot of federal regulations, mostly untouchable, actually. We found one exemption that may have addressed this under the Spill Prevention and Control of Countermeasures rule under the Clean Water Act, but then we went to EPA, and EPA said, well, this is the Clean Water Act, and you're clean air. So, and we couldn't really justify that there were pollution into navigable waters. So we found so under the SPCC rule, there is a security requirement, but these facilities are actually exempt, expressly exempt from the security plan. But then SPCC is only as enforced as the states want to enforce it. So in one of these sites, multiple of these sites, we don't see even berms to contain the oil if there's a spill. So then under the Clean Air Act, we looked under the Clean Air Act, and we found that under the General Duty Clause, which says that owners and operators they have to identify the hazard, and they have to prevent or minimize accidental release to protect the public, that this can apply. So that's where we're sort of basing our federal regulation or recommendation. On the industry level, consensus standards, we looked at the American Petroleum Institute, and we looked at API 2610, which applies, it has all these security requirements for tank terminals and downstream at the refinery end, but upstream is exempt, which is what we're dealing with. When it comes out of the ground and it goes to these storage sites, it's called upstream production, and the downstream security requirements, even though it's the same hazard, they're not covered by 2610 and it's 74, API 74, which is onshore oil and gas occupational protection, actually they have a survey in the back that says you should check the box and have no trespassing signs, but it's not really stated implicitly inside of the recommended practice, and it is just a recommended practice. NFPA, we looked at NFPA 30, and we found that NFPA actually identified this hazard in the 90s and said, you know, we see members of the public going onto these sites, and those who follow NFPA 30 should actually secure these sites. Their language is quite ambiguous. We found that they didn't really define isolated, and these tanks, even though they're in rural areas, communities live among these tanks, so they're not necessarily isolated or remote. So those things, we asked that NFPA to clarify those things. And we went beyond just fences, signs, and locks to look at, well, what kind of designs can be implemented to protect or reduce the explosion hazard of these facilities. And we found they could be flame arresters implemented, and those are some of the recommendations we made. Vapor recovery systems, which are these to close off the ability to release these flammable vapors into the air and put it to a flare or store the vapors. Internal floating roofs, which typically were not designed for tanks these tanks are usually 210 barrel capacity, 10 diameter tanks. But the technology is better, so, but we also recognize this is very, very expensive. But it's something to consider, considering these tanks haven't been updated. They're not required to be updated under any of the tank requirements. It's in a very old technology. Pressure vacuum valves. And so we made recommendations to EPA to publish a safety alert highlighting how these facilities are, the hazards of these facilities, and telling operators at these facilities, essentially telling them that they have a responsibility under the general duty clause to prevent these accidents. And we made recommendations to Oklahoma Corporation Commission, Texas Railroad Commission, and to security sites to require warning signs at the periphery of the site, not just at the tank, and to implement safer designs of the tanks. And the Mississippi Oil and Gas Board, we just issued one recommendation to require a safer tank design because they've made such measures. They've implemented security measures in the last year. API, we asked them to actually amend a standard or create a new standard identifying all the hazards at oil and gas facilities. And NFPA, we asked them to clarify the language. And sorry I had to rush through the end, but that's our little project. And our recommendations department will be following up to see the progress of these recommendations. We just issued this report last month. So, thank you.
Thank you, Vidisha. It was an interesting presentation. It shows how one small little public outreach effort can lead to some changes when you have people that have been affected involved. Really appreciate it.